Dell Technologies and Intel present ETRise, India on the Move, strengthening India's supply chain to power self-reliant MSMEs. Digital transformation partner, Salesforce, credit empowerment partner, TransUnion Civil, trade finance partner, Drip Capital.
We've all by now heard about the supply chain crisis, but how big is it really? Our livelihoods, food, jobs, energy depend on a well-oiled global supply chain. Any pileup means costly headache for the $22 trillion global merchandise trade. So when cosmetics giant Revlon filed for bankruptcy earlier this month, the global supply chain crunch proved to be the tipping point. When the Reserve Bank of India Governor Bitan Datta talks about globalization of inflation, this worse than anticipated inflation is primarily driven by the supply chain. Given the widespread implication of these crises, how can India prepare better? What does it need to do to strengthen its own supply chain network? We're joined by an expert panel that will look to find some answers. It is my pleasure to welcome today Kinjal Pande, CEO, Cluster India, and Indian Subcontinent Division, Sreeram Venkateswaran, Senior Vice President, Sales, Marketing and Communication, Bitan Datta, Managing Director and Partner, Cost Consulting, Vaideeswaran Sethuraman, Founder and CEO, Param Networks. Thank you all for joining us today. Kinjal, let me come straight to you first. How are supply chain executives feeding these days, and what's occupying their mind space?
Thanks, Param. That's a loaded question, but well, I think all of us will agree that over the last 2 years, I think one thing that we keep hearing is supply chain disruptions, and I think typically how we have been built up is that we are used to maybe just managing one incident or one crisis at a time, right? I mean, whether it's a natural crisis or anything else, but I think what has actually happened is that it's just been back to back. And even though it might be localized in one country, supply chains are all connected, and we've seen how it manifests and has global implications. So I think one thing that really is causing a lot of supply chain executives a sleepless night nowadays, when we talk to our customers, is really just being able to plan ahead. Just the ability to forecast. Do we go into short-term contracts or long-term contracts? Do we build buffers? How much buffer do we build? Where are our raw materials going to come from for tomorrow? What are the alternate supplying sourcing countries? Do we share inventories or do we manage by ourselves? Can we do nearshoring and so on and so forth? I mean, these are constant questions that the supply chain executives are asking themselves today, simply because in this disruptive environment, it's become the new normal now. So I think if I have to summarize, one thing that all of us are focusing on is how do we drive this whole agility mindset, the intuitiveness to see what next is coming and be able to work with our customers and build that into the supply chain for a seamless experience. I would say that would be the one that I would pick out.
Sundays are no more Sundays, is it?
Absolutely.
Sreeram, we can come to you. How have things changed after the pandemic, both in India and
So, Pran, I mean, I see the situation very differently, right? I mean, one is we can think about disruptions and trying to get prepared for disruptions. Most supply chain managers and people who run businesses are today, I think, more open than ever to really rediscuss the entire design of the supply chain, right? I mean, that's really opened up their minds, and they realize the potential pitfalls. They also see the potential opportunities, and that's a great situation to be in, right? I mean, here is where you can bring in all your creative juices to really help your clients and customers to really sort of build in, as Kinjal was saying, agility. And for me, flexibility is key, right? I mean, I think we'll see a time where we will start moving away a little bit from sort of a just-in-time to sort of contingency planning, which some of our customers call it just in case, right? I mean, that's going to be the norm. Though we have seen disruptions in supply chain over the last 2 years, I mean, that's going to happen continuously. Another wave of COVID may not hit. Another ever given may not get stuck in Suez. But these things are going to happen, right? I mean, tomorrow the customer demands may change. We saw supply chain disruptions on the inbound side. There could be a huge amount of supply chain disruptions or preference changes, demand changes on the demand side. I think this is going to be, this volatility is where the opportunity for really strong, robust supply chain building is. I mean, that's the opportunity for us, right? I mean, how do we actually build in flexibility? How do we build in, as Kinjal was saying, agility? I mean, end of the day, robustness, agility, and flexibility is the key to any supply chain. A customer usually only demands, asks what is promised. I think that's where the real opportunity lies. And I think a lot of people in the both distribution side of the supply chain, also the inbound side of the supply chain have started to realize that. And they're more than open, or more open than ever to really start discussing those long-term and mid-term plans. That's a great opportunity.
Right. And it's no more just relegated to some management institute, right? Supply chain.
I think the discussion about supply chain and robustness of supply chain is out in the open right now. It's no longer a boardroom discussion, right? I mean, so people realize the pitfall, I mean, the potential disasters it can cause to any company or any brand. And when you start looking at product from a brand perspective, I think that's where the seriousness is starting to come out, right? Really, people are saying that there's going to be a value erosion if my stability is not there. And that is getting them to focus on really relooking at the entire supply chain. People are actually, I mean, stayed away from redesigning supply chains and distribution networks from a post-GST era. I think and guys are seeing now an opportunity of disruption plus an opportunity of consolidation or going hyper local as a possible route to really optimize to serve customers better.
Interesting. Bitan, how is India doing when it comes to its own supply chain network?
I think lots of improvements, and I've been watching this space closely, for the last 15 years of my consulting career, in the 20 overall. But I would say, especially in the last 10 years, I think there's been loads of improvement, right? I think there's a fair bit of organization that's happened, on the physical distribution side. Also with respect to, the transportation element of logistics, right? I think the government's push on infrastructure, the road building that's happened. I think I used to remember when when we used to model inventory as an example, right? I mean, you would always tend to take the Northeast states, right? And look at the amount of time that it would take, the amount of variability that would happen. And hence you would always bloat up the inventory that you might want to keep for the Northeast states, right? Now, those times have been shrunk, right? There is better reliability in the physical distribution component, right? There's still much more to do. I think our logistics cost as a proportion of the total spend, I mean, as a country, it's still very high, right? But I think we made significant strides in that, right? And significant improvements. However, I would say that I think there is if I just expand beyond supply chain to the larger manufacturing space, right? I think the point is that we are still very dependent, on a lot of other countries for supplies of components, etc., right? And that kind of tends to be a bit of a challenge for the supply chain for those industries, those sectors, those companies which have not localized sufficiently or built a sufficient amount of value chain control at their own end, right? If you're still at, let's say, the tail end of the value chain in a lot of cases, just doing the assembly component of it, right? I think the risks continue with what we've seen pan out, rather precipitate, I would say, over the last 2-3 years. Not that those risks went there. And I think that's requiring a bit of a shift in thinking. I do see a lot of organizations, progressive ones that think of resilience as a core parameter, starting to take steps. But if I were to contrast how India is thinking of resilience, of access, of flexibility versus a bunch of other MNCs globally who are doing different things, I think we are still probably a little bit slow. There is room for improvement in terms of embracing this concept at a much greater level. I would still say on the resilience component of the thinking, it's the Indian BUs, Indian subsidiaries of the MNCs, which are probably thinking much more progressively, along with some of the really large Indian organizations. But the larger mass of Indian organizations, I think, are still a little bit more here and now in the thinking, I would say, versus just being very long-term focused.
Right. Very. For many, supply chain is merely logistics and warehousing, but there is so much more. How can tech make a difference, and where is India's tech adoption when it comes to supply chain management?
I think well said, right? So I think definitely logistics is much more than supply chain is much more than the logistics and warehousing. So today, if you look at it, enterprise, collaborates with their supply chain partners, right, and send thousands of messages every day. Let it be, a production planning or some kind of a forecasting or your delivery schedules, right? So much communication just goes off the your logistics radar, right? In terms of that's where today where tech can make a difference is about how do you bring visibility from one organization to another organization. Today, pretty much largely, most of the organizations, when it comes to supply chain, even after spending millions of dollars in digital transformation, a lot of these products are like ERPs, supply chain management softwares are designed to run in silos within one organization, right? When it comes to communication between across organizations today, the very, very less solutions are available in the market, right? There's no cross visibility between the organizations, right? That's one of the area where a lot of this automation fails, real-time communication fails, right? And that's where technology can really add a lot of value in this space, right? So moment you are able to bring this visibility, a lot of decision making can be automated, can be done real time, right? So I think in my opinion, where tech can really make a big difference is how do you build this visibility across organization? What's the kind of backbone you're going to build to ensure that there's a real time communication, real digital communication, collaboration happens in the market.
Right. Kinjal, you've been associated with the supply chain sector for almost a decade and a half. What are some of the challenges that you think still exist in India and ones that we probably failed to address over the years?
Very much like a few that have already been mentioned, but I would like to pick up, what they mentioned around tech and digitization. And I think while we are the IT capital of the world, but I think the uptake from a logistics perspective has been, slow. That's also largely to do with how, structured or unstructured the market is with so many players. I mean, I was attending another panel on sustainability, and somebody mentioned that one shipment goes through 18 desks from the start, from the origin to the destination, right? I mean, there's so many players in the middle. And to truly give a digitalized experience, to the end customer or consumer, you are dependent on so many vendor partners, your own customer supply chain, your service provider, everybody to be talking the same language. And as Vaidee mentioned, it's all broken up, right? So to kind of get all the information on one platform where all the players in the market end to end have that visibility. Now that doesn't exist globally. We are talking to blockchains, but we are far away from that, right? But having said that, I think from an India perspective, we can do a lot more. And it's not that the government is not doing much in terms of policies. It's not that the organizations are not doing much, but it's also about how quickly the organizations want to embrace it, because it comes with a trade-off, which is cost. How willing are they in the short term to mid-term to kind of invest in technology solutions to kind of move towards in the digital supply chain? I mean, in DB Schenker, for example, we're doing quite a lot on transportation, on warehousing, on giving supply chain visibility, milestones, automated milestone reports, and so on and so forth. But this is a logistics community with so many dependencies, and it's important that the community sort of collaborates and gets onto the same platforms to give that experience to the end consumer. So if I have to pick out one, that's digitization. And then second, if I have to pick out, that'll be sustainability. I think we as consumers are changing. We want to look at logistics supply chain becoming more green. As an organization, we might be doing a lot more, but the organizations in the community also need to kind of embrace sustainability and start investing now. Start changing how we buy, how we procure, how we source, how we manufacture now, so that we can change for the future. And I think that's another slow uptake that we see from an India perspective.
I think one of the key problems that we always face is the mindset where supply chain is mainly about just moving goods from here to there, and that happens through roads. So I think people think, why do we need digitization for that? Our logistics mix, like I said, is completely, maybe majority of it is through roads, which is highly inefficient. How do we change this transportation mix and rely less on road transport?
So, Pran, thanks for that question, actually, right? I mean, this question sort of addresses the efficiency, performance issue of the supply chain. So, I mean, the issue we have to solve for as logistics community convincing customers is not to look at segmented things segmented, right? I mean, people look at transportation in one pocket, warehousing in one pocket. The game in supply chain is integration, right? I mean, unless you are able to bring everything together, you don't have levers to enhance performance. I mean, if you are managing a process, you have levers to optimize the process. I mean, if you are managing a 300,000 square feet warehouse with 300 people, how much can you optimize? But if you start managing the inbound to the warehouse, outbound from the warehouse, distribution, last mile delivery, then there's a huge amount of optimization possible, right? And digitization actually starts making sense when we look at the entire supply chain from a unitary perspective. I think that change is coming, but much slower than what it should be, right? So that's one. So for me, transportation by rail, road, that's not a big challenge. That's an outcome of how we are looking at the entire integrated supply chain, right? So I mean, having said that, I mean, I've been a trucker all my life. I've sold trucks for 30 years. So I understand. I believe that road transportation is not as inefficient as it's portrayed to be, right? End of the day, we can't see only the prime leg of the transportation. You have to see the primary, the prime, and the last leg of the transportation. And the amount of flexibility that a road transportation provides is unbelievable, right? I mean, that has to be sort of harnessed. But are there efficient ways to do it? Yes, there are more efficient ways to do it. Is there a possibility of developing a hub and spoke concept to enhance efficiency of the transportation model? I think there is a lot of scope doing that. Are people focused enough to build that model? No, people are not focused towards building that model. I think we have to change the outlook from how are we taking goods from Delhi to Bombay to how do I serve Delhi best from Bombay? When we start looking at that, trucks or trains won't make a difference. It's only a question of you will start choosing the most optimum for that particular job. I think that's where we have to get to. And this requires a lot of talking, convincing, discussion, design, proof of concepts, all those things. And I think there is quite a bit of opening of minds with a lot of people to really discuss this. Earlier, this was a taboo. A supply chain head would come and say, I want this, please deliver this to me. Today, at least they're willing to look at what you have to offer. I think that's a big change coming, and I see that positive.
Right. Bitan, what do you think is the weakest link when it comes to India's supply chain network? And how do we address that?
I would say, and it's linked a little bit to, the overall competitiveness of Indian manufacturing industry, and one of the factors that we see coming up in the overall global competitiveness index and the rankings of India, right? And I think the challenge remains with regards scale, right? And how do the smaller parts of the supply chain really gain scale, right? And I think that has remained one of the core themes. That I think we've still seen very large parts, and and today we have big organized players coming into India trying to set shop, trying to become big, right? But a bunch of the policies, procedures probably still seem to be constraining folks in terms of operating freely, operating to the right scale that they want. At the same time, there are many small players, right? The unfragmented segment, which controls large parts of the supply chain, whether that be transport, whether that be core supply of components of different materials into organizations, that still tends to remain small, right? Now, today, as a consultant, when I'm asked that map the supply chain risk, in the supply chain for my customer, I mean, how do I pick up data on some very small suppliers or very small transporters, right? There are just so many of them, right? If I were to be operating in a different, more developed economy, I would probably pick up one of the more established ratings, rankings of companies from at least a financial strength, a financial resilience perspective. The other aspects can be known, but there are many here where you wouldn't even find the registration properly, right? And I think that scale issue is a significant challenge, right? And it lends in different ways, right? On one side, what you see reflected in India's competitiveness index and rankings, that supplier depth, supplier quality, quite often is a challenge. I mean, some industries in India, such as auto, have done a great job at it, right? And which is why the auto components industry is so good. There are so many of them who have gone out. But is it true for, the larger set, the larger parts? Auto is probably what, 10-15% of the GVA of manufacturing in India, but there's still another 80-85%, right, which needs to be catered to. And I think the supplier depth quality remains challenged in those cases. And again, I'm using the word supplier a bit more broadly. I mean, it's not just material suppliers, but even, I would say, elements such as transportation, warehousing, right? Organization, developing scale, structure is coming in, but I think, as Sreeram was also saying, I mean, it's happening at a much slower pace than what it should be. For a nation that moves goods at such high scale, is such a core component of the global value chains, right? I think we ought to be moving faster. And within this question of scale, within this question of fragmentation, is also the question of digitalization or embracement of technology and digital, which will kind of help thread together everything. I think at some level, even that comes in as a bit of a question, and whether I should be doing it, right? And hence the parity of systems, whether I really want everyone to be at a significantly high scale system or not, that starts becoming challenges and problems. I think we are trying to work on it. While I say that there are challenges, but at the same time, I think there is thinking around open digital ecosystems, which allows everyone to kind of plug in, democratizes the access to digital and technology in a manner, right? Having much more open marketplaces in the environment. I think there is a move towards a lot of that happening. But what I worry is even a lot of the digital parts. I mean, I just see too many people coming in, right? Or even fragmentation happening in that space, right? And probably there'll be 1 to 2 or maybe 3 winners for every idea, for everything. But at some level, I think, how do we really buckle down, really grow some big players, right? Or allow big players coming into India to grow. I think that is supremely critical for growth and development of our supply chain, and for us to become a supreme force, in the global supply chain.
Right. In the digital space, I think it'll be like packing ready. I think, yeah, that would be one of the ways. Vaidi, if I could come to you, what are the trends that you are seeing when it comes to technology, supply chain management, and what are some of the best practices that Indian companies can look at when it comes to managing their supply chain?
So if you look at trends, very traditionally, people used to bother about when it comes to supply chains about large enterprise to large enterprise, optimization, right? I mean, what happens between Walmart and Unilever's well been cared, right? But I think the more and more now we are looking at how do we get into this multi-tier supply chain kind of scenarios where all kind of enterprise can participate and have an equal level of communication, because without that, any investment on supply chain management practices is not going to yield you 100% result, right? So how do we include more and more SMEs and solutions, right? Some of them to name is like, you have this in, at least in the West, multi-enterprise supply chain business networks, right? I mean, operated by many organizations. There are very matured offerings available by, it could be SaaS-based network or whatever. So I think that's been adapted. One of the trends that's happening in the West, what I see is also that, they actually participate in more than one business network. I think it at least slowly acceptance is coming into a kind of thing that, I'm not going to be attached to one particular business network. I'm going to attach to multiple networks so that I can automate as many as possible, right? So kind of moving away from, I'm going to innovate on my environment, my enterprise, to how do we build and bring an innovation inclusion across the entire ecosystem, right? So a lot of things, a lot of startups are working on things like, route optimizations, AI-based image recognitions, a barcode, control tower, IoT. Many things are, happening in this space. Why that focuses on, within my organization, how much I can optimize, how much I can, improve myself. It's more of how do you bring the collaboration, how do you ensure across the ecosystem it is efficiency, right? Because, the slowest moving sheep is going to slow down the entire movement, right? While we talk about it, the other side is getting more tricky. Is the more and more I want to participate in open commerce networks, what's happening to my data privacy, cyber security, right? I mean, that's a big overload for the enterprise, because that's not the area they want to focus on, because they have main business to focus on. So this is kind of the striking a right balance between here is very, very, very difficult. Having said that, I think the trend what I see clearly is more of integrated supply chain planning, right? How do I, strongly get a real-time view of my dealers, my customers' requirement, what is my production capabilities of my supplier, and in the entire process, what is the incentive for the whole ecosystem, right? It's not that I am going to do a just-in-time inventory. I'm going to increase my bottom line or a top line on my process, right? What is that translates to my supply chain downstream, right? So that they can also benefit out of this, and there's the incentive for everybody to come together and work together, right? That's the kind of thought process coming in the market, right? I think India has an opportunity to actually leapfrog and look at how do we build a healthy ecosystem, solutions around this ecosystem thinking and going forward, right? I think that's where I see an opportunity to go forward.
Interesting. That brings me to the the $1 trillion question. How long do you think the supply chain chaos will last? And what are the lessons for India?
Well, that's a crystal ball question. But I think, it was mentioned earlier, I think we have to get used to the fact that we are in a disruptive environment, and that's not going to change. 2 years of pandemic, the positive in that is that, we have started thinking ahead, right? So one small problem, I'm sitting in Myanmar right now. Who would have thought that one fine day there will be a military coup, and then, we will have all of these disruptions, right? So the point is, it happens in one part of the globe, and then it impacts the supply chains globally. And next year, while we're talking about normalization of the supply chain in terms of the freight rates, there is better capacity availability compared to where we are right now. We are seeing in the market that from an ocean perspective, the order books are full or getting better. We are seeing 8 to 9% capacity improvement over the course of end of 2023-24. But at the same time, there's also IMO, where some of the non-sustainable vessels are getting scrapped for better vessels, and so on and so forth. Now, there's so many drivers, and then there are these unforeseen disruptions. Now, which drivers play stronger in the coming year? Who's to tell, right? So what all we can do is basically just make our supply chain, or overuse of a word, more resilient, mentally be agile, be intuitive, and really, really dig deep to ensure that we're working very, very closely with the customers to kind of support them through this. The lessons learned, it's been mentioned, but I would say it again. The more we embrace digitization, the better data we have, which we can read, we can analyze, and it can make predictions easier for us, for the customer supply chain. That's one. Nearshoring, definitely. I think we should look at about how we can make our supply chain more dependent, more resilient, more sustainable by looking at, changing our sourcing markets and as nearshoring as possible. But we all know that sourcing of materials will always be from the most competitive place, and the supply chain will always be based closer to the customers. So there is only this much of nearshoring that one can do. And yeah, lastly, I would say that within the organization, one clear lesson, and I'm seeing this as a very positive change when we talk to our customers, is supply chain has a place in the board for many of the customers now. It was always considered to be a logistically operational function. If something goes wrong on the shop floor, you will be the first person to call, but otherwise nobody talks about supply chain. Supply chain has a place on the board right now. It works very, very closely and more closer with business right now when we talk to our customers than it ever did. which means that a lot of these lines and silos that was operating within the customer, especially in manufacturing customers, is sort of blending, where supply chain and commercial work very, very closely together to kind of make it happen. And that helps in predictions and forecasting and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of lessons to learn, but I would pick up these 2, 3. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Sreeram, if I can come to you. We've talked a bunch of stuff about logistics. What is the role of warehousing, and what is the state of warehousing in the country, especially post?
Param, great question, right? I mean, we speak about supply chain disruptions in the last 2 years coming from the inbound supply chain, right? Because of trade routes were blocked. China went into COVID. It gave COVID to everybody else. But fundamentally, we have to also see supply chain disruption from a demand perspective. I see demand, the way the demand is happening in India, and especially the rural demand, significantly change, right? So we will have to figure out very innovative ways to get closer to the consuming markets. There is e-commerce that is growing. Tomorrow, Kirana stores will start buying from e-commerce sites. The customer is becoming impatient. He buys from Instamart one day, he goes to the Kirana store the next day, goes to organized retail the next day. So everything is in a flux. I think we will take some good time to settle this down and build in predictability. And I can't agree more with Kinjal that we need to have digitalization of the entire supply chain to really gather some intelligence on how this is moving. That will help us define and refine our distribution networks and the demand side supply chain. Having said that, I think warehousing in India is seen a significant improvement in the last, I say, 6 to 7 years time. Most companies are speaking about grade A infrastructure, speaking about large ones, speaking about going vertical, talking about how do I ensure that the same infrastructure is good enough for the next 5, 6 years for demand increase. So that's all great, right? There's a lot of digitalization happening in supply. In the warehousing, WMS is getting standard. A lot of technology coming in terms of pick to light, pick to voice, those kind of things. So they're all great, right? These are the bedrock of tomorrow's productivity improvements, right? That's going to be the key. Having said that, if we were to look at the entire manufacturing and ecosystem, right? We tend to sort of ignore the MSMEs, right? As supply chain managers, we also look at large companies, the top 300 accounts, top 400 accounts. But India and Bharat is driven by MSMEs, right? So how do we actually really, if we have to become a $5 trillion economy, we have to triple our large companies, large corporations. And that's not a small job. The large corporations are not going to overnight come from startups. A lot of medium scale industries are going to become large, right? How do we actually enable that? And I think if we go with a mindset that, yeah, I see demand, I have to enable them reaching the market and fulfilling the demand. I have to also enable these MSMEs today who can be large corporations tomorrow of how do I enable production with more efficient inbound supply chains. Now, the MSMEs, unfortunately, since they don't have too much of scale, are cost incompetitive, right? That's somewhere I think we all can play a role. There's a huge amount of scope on multi-client facilities. There's a huge amount of scope that we can play as supply chain managers into consolidation and consolidated distribution. I think we have to start looking at that. And coming back to warehousing where we started, right? The quality of warehousing beyond of being a grade A facility that's there. But I think most companies are also looking at now making sustainable warehouses. Solar is becoming a norm. 30% green area is becoming a norm. So diversity, diverse workforce, skilling of people in the local area is becoming a norm. So these are all great things that are happening in warehousing. Fundamentally, you will see in the next 5 to 6 years time, a huge amount of focus on multi-client distribution networks and multi-client consolidation networks. And that's where will start to move, because end of the day, you can't only be working with the top 200 companies. You have to start enabling the next 2,000 companies, right? And that's where we as 3Pers and partners to customers have to play a very, very important role.
Bitan, you work with a number of companies. What are you seeing when it comes to CEOs doing things differently, especially in the face of supply chain challenges?
Yeah, I think the very good thing, and to probably steal a tagline is that, I mean, the time for supply chain has come, probably, right? I mean, and that is quite often overused in a manner. But I must say that I think this as a function, as a topic, has now crept into the C-suite agenda, right? Quite often, and more so in the past, it has been relegated to a fulfillment function, right? That there are a bunch of people, at the tail end of the customer journey when the order is there, right? Someone would convert the order into deliveries, right? I think it's no longer that, and hence I think creeping into the C-suite agenda, the willingness to invest for CEOs on 3 counts, right? Processes, so really elevating the set of planning processes from something which is very functional, very siloed, to the span of integrated business planning. I think several organizations have set up a sales and operations planning layer, but evolving it to integrated business planning, integrating even finance into the world planning, truly working off the one number concept. I think that's happened. On the side of organization, I mean, a few years back, I would always have the very standard deliverable of actually creating a planning function, right? And quite often in Indian organizations, you would not find a planning function, right? So a planning vertical coming in as a very core business function, I think, is the other bit that's happening. The role of the chief supply chain officer or the supply chain head itself being elevated is another big thing. And finally, in terms of technology, right, and having end-to-end visibility and transparency, right, I would still say we're probably on the lower end of the curve in terms of the adoption, but I think there is a willingness to invest in the technology for wanting more visibility, more transparency on the supply side, or with customers, providing customers the transparency of the orders and visibility. And even for the core planning bits, right, investing in something like advanced planning systems. I mean, we are seeing massive traction in the market right now with regards the inclination to plan in a much more automated manner. To the question you had posed to Kinjal earlier, right, I think, while one would need to do crystal ball gazing to find when disruption would happen, but if you just trace the history of the number of black swan events and the periodicity with which they're happening, the period between these events have shrunk very, very, very sharply, right? And hence the only way you can say, if that were to be the trend to look at, that the periodicity at which these events will happen will only be much more frequent. And that goes to the point that volatility, uncertainty will continue in our business environment. And hence all these 3 bits of supply chain, planning, organization, technology, and then you string them together with what your supply chain strategy is, I think is supremely important. And hence that becomes a very, very important C-suite agenda. And again, I mean, long answer to your question, but I think the willingness to invest for CEOs in this topic, I think, has gone up very sharply with what we've seen happen over the last 2-3 years.
Willingness to invest is often, I think, good news for many. Very when I can come to you, as with technology, some work and the others do not. When it comes to supply chain, what are some of the technology innovations that you think will work? And what are the limitations when it comes to technology? We hear so much about, from this panel itself that, what technology can do. What are the limitations? What are some of the things that can technology never do?
So again, I think I agree with Sreeram, right? It's about how do you include all multi-tier enterprises into your technology roadmap is much more important than thinking about top 200 companies in your list, right? See, there are a couple of aspects to look at it. One is there's a lack of standardizations everywhere, right? There's a definite need for protocols for for open innovation. Like as like as other panel member also said, there's a lot of acceptance in the CTO, a lot of innovation that's happening, a lot of awareness that's happened. That is kind of enabling more and more companies like us and many others to innovate day and night, right? For all of this, I think it's more of if there's open standards, and that will actually help people to innovate in a common platform. One is looking from the technology angle. Other one is do we have the right infrastructure backbone available today for the enterprise to innovate on top of this. Right? For me, more I see limitations from there. How much flexible in terms of I can send data. Like today we know 2 or 3 ERP giants exist in the market. Do they interoperate? Right? Do they communicate each other? Right? What is missing in terms of ensuring I'll connect ERPs of the world to come to a single platform, single network, and talk about it? Right? So these are some of the limitations in terms of it's more of a lot of frameworks, a lot of open protocols, a lot of flexibility in data exchange that backbone needs to be created. So that the technology can actually create an impact. Technology alone cannot create an impact, right? What UP has done it, right? The infrastructure has really helped more technology, more innovation is possible over this, right? So having said that, what would work in the future is definitely, I mean, I'm a big, I'm spending a lot of time on this Web3 and the blockchain space. Kind of definitely a strong believer. We're building an ecosystem around it. I think that could be one opportunity where not really getting into blockchain of it. It's more of a decentralization, right? So ensuring that there's no. We need more and more people to come and provide solutions. The more and more decentralizations, more easy standards for people to accommodate. At the same time, we allow people to operate with good, data privacy, data security. That's also one of the key requirements in the enterprise space, which in the name of open commerce network, we cannot compromise. We can't force all the organizations to come and operate at things. See, certain areas has worked out very well, right? Like, your account payable and account receivable automation side, right? Where you can bring an e-invoicing standard, make everybody work on it. There are like pointed solutions, low hanging fruit, we can look at it. But when it comes to supply chain, very operations sensitive, like, for example, I want to build my production visibility I want to give to my customer. I want to give my inventory visibility to my supplier to do an auto replenishment, right? So these kind of innovations you want to do, I think the more and more standardization is required.
Right. Last question before I wrap up and like a summation. Kinjal, to you first, from logistics to warehousing to ports. What are the things that you think we need to strengthen when it comes to our supply chain network to realize our economic potential? And do we have the right set of policies?
Well, we definitely have the right set of policies. I mean, if I just have to quickly, summarize, we don't need to repeat it, but we all know the kind of money that is getting invested in logistics, by the government. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. We're talking about the Gati Shakti project. We're talking about, the money which the work that NHI is doing on the highways. We're talking about warehousing, parks and zones being built up. So I think the policies are definitely in the right direction and very, very well timed. For me, I think it would be more about the mindset change. And I think a couple of things like that have come up through this discussion is, how do we build our supply chains in a much more, how are we self-sufficient in our supply chains, right? So we look at near sourcing, we look at circular economies. How do we reduce, reuse, recycle so that there is less dependency on more raw materials coming in from another sourcing country that could potentially get impacted. And I think we need to change in the way if we really have to be a quality player, which we are gearing up to on a global platform, we have to be able to make those trade-offs between cost and long-term investment. For example, sustainability. As DB Schenker, if we are investing in EV vehicles, we are investing in buying eco-fuels, it takes a whole community, as Sreeram mentioned, to kind of make that change. And that mindset change should happen. If we want to build strong supplier relationships to kind of take us out of disruptions, that supplier relationships will not happen over the negotiation of 1 rupee per square foot. It will be a trade-off with regards to quality and long-term relationship over price. So I think that mindset in terms of looking a little long-term on what really matters with regards to supply chain, making it stronger by building stronger relationship with suppliers, making it more sustainable versus cost. That mindset has to change. Now, I would say that is one thing that we need to change. The policies are all there to support us.
If I can come to you, what are some of the things that you think we could do to strengthen our supply chain and make it more resilient? You're on mute.
As Kinjal said, lot of things are happening in the right direction, right? Logistics parks are coming up, the industrial corridors are up and running. So a lot of things are happening, right? I mean, if I were to complain about few things that are not happening and should be taken up in right earnest, I would say, I don't know whether for the last 50 years, transportation has still not got an industry status, right? We need to start regulating things there. There is a huge amount of wastage happening. There is huge amount of, I mean, we can organize things. There should be timing. Accidents happen because drivers are fatigued out driving 14, 15 hours. I think there is a huge amount of scope, not only in sort of organizing that sector, but also creating a lot of safety net for the drivers and the people who work in that industry. I think that one change in policy has to happen. Second thing, one of the most important aspects beyond of technology is people in the logistics, right? I mean, we are dependent on huge amount of people supply, manpower supply. And if it goes to warehousing, it is very local source people. If it goes to industries on the tomorrow industries coming up on the industrial corridors that are coming up, it's going to be again off the cities. So how do we actually create availability of trained manpower ready to be deployed? Today, it becomes the headache of people like us to recruit fresh people, train them, allow them to make mistakes, right, at the cost of a customer. I mean, that has to go. So there has to be some kind of a program where, I mean, warehousing is going to stay, like it or not. It's going to expand. We have got today 26, 27 warehousing centers. It's going to go to 50 in the next 3 years' time. It will go to 100 in the next 10 years' time, right? I mean, this depth is only going to go up. How do we make manpower available? Is there something you can do as from a policy perspective, right? And these two are things that I think can really enhance efficiencies and speed in the supply chain. Third, Kinjal did touch upon the topic of sustainability. I think sustainability, I have two views, right? I mean, as supply chain people, we can't wait for our customers to really push us for sustainability and inclusivity, right? I mean, we have to decide to do it. And I firmly believe there's a short-term cost penalty, but there's a long-term value in that. I mean, quality or sustainability cannot come at a cost, right? I mean, then it'll never happen. I think we need to find out ways to really package this better. There could even be sort of support from the Fed to help us do that. But I think this is a real topic where we have to go and suggest how do we actually build sustainability in the supply chains of our customers, right? I mean, simple things are solar. Simple things are, I mean, liquid emissions into the environment. Simple things are rainwater harvesting. But a lot more things need to be done. I mean, we are still struggling with EV infrastructure, EV charging infrastructure. We only have three-wheelers which are worth, and we run the largest fleet of electric three-wheelers in the last mile. But I think huge amount of scope. And also somehow we need to find ways to build sensitivity in sustainability from a perspective of transportation, right? People all think shifting to EV is the only solution, right? We have to get from here to a better place to the best place. Today, CNG could be one step in the right direction. Till the time we get larger vehicles on electric drive, can we look at replacing our fleet proactively into CNG? That will at least reduce the CO CO NOx levels. Maybe SOOT will be a little higher, but I think we need to find ways to balance it out carefully. I think these are 4 or 5 points I see panning out in the next 3 to 5 years' time. I'm clear that one big miss by the governments, successive governments have been not granting industry status to trucking as a profession, right? I mean, that will help consolidate transportation, and that will make it more organized and much better oiled.
Right, Bitan, if I can come to you, how will we create future-ready and resilient supply chain network?
I think quite clearly, and we've spoken about it over the last the course of the hour here. I think it has to be through wiring digital and technology, right, into our whole supply chain planning and thinking. As we do that, our frame though in which we should think is, digital will not just solve everything that you do, right? I mean, and just bringing in a technology doesn't help. So from that perspective, how do you modulate your processes? How do you modulate and change your strategy right around supply chain to kind of make the technology work. I think that's critical. We have seen enough examples of, for example, planning systems, transportation management systems being brought in, in the early 2000s, in the early 2010s as well, right? A lot of it hasn't worked, right? Because the companies fundamentally didn't change their ways of working, right? I think that's one bit. And I think how do you tweak those processes? How do you really use technology as decision support systems versus decision-taking systems, right? I think it's a question that digital and tech will always be there as a decision support system for humans to finally take the decision. I think that's where, a little bit of the bionic thinking in supply chain, I think, is critical, and how we work together on that. And I think that's important, and that, I think, will help. Beyond that, in the days and times that we are, I think the thinking around resilience, and I think I would say taking the talking and the thinking to an element of actually doing, I would say, and we would urge, organizations to really think of measurability of resilience, right? So so it's just good, not just good to talk about resilience, but how do you measure resilience, right? So if you can design a set of KPIs, a set of performance measures around resilience, right? It could be, do I have sufficient alternate sources? Do I have sufficient alternate number of suppliers? So measures like these, right, which needs to come into, let's say, the operations and the supply chain MIS, I think that will be supremely helpful. And I think beyond that, just looking at this in a much more structured manner, as I said, the willingness to invest, I think, is there. I mean, business conversations seem to be indicating that. But if we can plot all of this out in a 3 to 5 year kind of a roadmap, and then start working towards that in a very systematic manner at every individual organization's level, I think we would have made huge progress collectively to move India's supply chain forward. Yeah.
Right. Last question, Vaide. Years from now, when we look at this time, will this mark the point when people started to manage their supply chain differently?
Absolutely. I think thanks to all the awareness happening today, I think a lot of companies are innovating, a lot of internally, I mean, both the enterprise and the service providers, startups, and everybody's, innovating continuously. Definitely, it's going to be a big leap. So in my opinion, today, think of like, enterprise running out of Excel sheets today, right? And like traditionally how India moves from a digital era, they skipped the laptop era and desktop era, went into a mobile era. Similarly, I see that, we can actually skip from, just move from an Excel era to a completely, supply chain technology orchestration platforms, multi-enterprise business network platforms, let it be, go from Web 1 to Web 3. That kind of a leapfrog, I would definitely expect that to happen, especially in the Indian context, where in the name of digital transformation, I think we will go from very, very Excel to and more of orchestration platforms in the future.
Wonderful. I think the need is real and the time to meet it is now. From this discussion, it's clear we must act now to build resilient global supply chains and keep trade. Thank you all for joining us today.
Dell Technologies and Intel present ETRise, India on the Move, strengthening India's supply chain to power self-reliant MSMEs. Digital transformation partner, Salesforce. Credit empowerment partner, TransUnion Civil. Trade finance partner, Drip Capital.